You are listening to the Real Men Feel Show with your hosts Andy Grant and Appio Hunter. Real Men Feel is all about encouraging men to allow and express all of their emotions. Despite what you may have been taught, all emotions do serve you. Real Men Feel is committed to opening up discussions that most men aren't having, but you certainly don't need to be a man to join us. The Real Men Feel podcast is produced live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern for your growth and enjoyment. You can find more information about the Real Men Feel movement at realmenfeel.org. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or subscribe on iTunes by visiting realmenfeel.org/iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at realmenfeel.org and at facebook.com/realmenfeelshow. All links mentioned in each episode are in the show notes found on the blog at realmenfeel.org. This is a weekly program, and your comments, feedback, and participation are welcome during the live show and anytime in the Facebook group, on Twitter, or at realmenfeel.org. Now, let's get into this week's show.
Hello and welcome to Real Men Feel. So glad that everybody is joining us. I am Appio Hunter, the co-host of Real Men Feel. My wonderful host and good friend Andy Grant is actually not with us this evening. He is turning into a famous actor and got a part in a movie, and he is out there playing his part and hanging out with the likes of many A-list actors. So I am with him in spirit, super happy and celebrating, and at the same time super jealous that he gets to be there. But hey, guess what? I get to hang out with a super awesome guy right now myself.
There you go.
And indeed, so thank you so much for everybody for being here. Tonight we are going to be talking about the power of using athletics in character and leadership development with the founder of the Good Athlete Project, Jim Davis. Welcome, Jim. We're so glad that you could be here tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So a little bit about background. I was looking at some very interesting, you have a really, really interesting background here.
Thank
you. For sure. You've been listening to the podcast for a while, so we're always happy about that. So you are currently a staff and student wellness coordinator at a high school there in Illinois where you are.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to being an athlete, you also happen to be an artist, a poet, a writer, so super balanced guy. And you have a master's, several degrees.
Mm-hmm.
The most recent one, I understand, is from Harvard, a master's in human development and psychology with an emphasis on neuroscience.
Yep, cognitive neuroscience.
Neuroscience.
Yep.
And you've...
It's a passion, for sure.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, I love, and we'll probably be talking a bit about the neuroscience because I've always been fascinated by that. Even though I tend to be in the woo-woo, you know, from time to time, I also just fascinated with how the human brain functions.
Absolutely.
And you are a studio painting advocate, a football captain.
At some point at least, all of the above.
That is so awesome. That is so awesome. And you've played arena football in the past too, right?
Yeah. So I have done kind of all of these things to varying degrees. I really do. It's probably clear already that I really do try to chase my passions, or we'll start out with accurate language. I chase the work that I'm willing to do. And it just so happens that the work that I'm wildly passionate about is in both athletics and the arts, academia as well. But that's, to me, feels almost like a link. They're all on the same level in that way.
I really like that. You know, we were kind of, just before we started recording, talking about how you definitely do not fit that stereotype of the jock who only focuses just on sports. But there's that balance, that passion for all things, all the entirety of the human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. First of all, I am not into stereotypes, as silly as that sounds. I just think it's silly, right? To say like there's a stereotypical jock is the same as saying, all artists are this way, or all academics are this way, or all men are this way, to go with sort of the theme of the podcast. I just don't subscribe to that. right? I really like the same human part of me that really likes to run around and be, and move and play sports and be with a team and enjoy the outdoors and all those things. The same human part of me enjoys like sitting down and painting and reading and being involved in those things as well. So those things, I'm very lucky that I've had a super supportive family. My parents did not tell me I had to focus on one thing. They encourage the same kind of idea, chase the work that you're willing to do. So those things I get this a lot, actually, this kind of novelty of being artist, athlete sort of thing. To me, they feel very natural and part of the same breath. They don't feel distinct.
Yeah, and I really like how you mentioned that you really don't like the labels, if you will, the stereotypes. I've always kind of felt very passionately the same way. It's like, what would the world be like if we didn't have labels, if we didn't have the stereotypes, if we didn't have all of the shoulds, expectations, and everything else?
Sure.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting that you should mention the support from your family, because just before the podcast, I was starting to engage in a conversation with one of our past guests, Diva Logan, about raising better human beings versus raising better men or raising better women or whatever. Just better human beings. And one of the things that we started to talk about was this idea that rather than putting expectations on our children, why not just allow them to explore their passions without, let them make the choice and help them answer the questions, guide them and so forth, but let them decide what path is best for them. And it sounds like that's exactly what happened with you. You wound up finding the best path for you.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that, because I think I agree with hesitancy though, because I think yes, 100% yes, you should be able to, don't force someone down a different road or, one road or another, but there are some parameters, right? And I look, meaning like my dad would have been very happy if I had played. I didn't have to play football. I could have done a number of things, right? He would have been happy as long as I was trying hard and didn't lie, cheat, and steal and things like that. So I say that because yes, chase your passion, but not completely untethered, right? Like there are some moral staples that we have to abide by.
Absolutely.
I believe, and work ethic is one of them. And it's funny, if you can get to those core staples, be it moral or behavioral or otherwise, I think they lead to success in any field, right? Yeah. If you show up every day with consistency and passion and work toward the thing you're doing, if you show up into the studio and do that, or show up onto the field and do that, you'll likely see a positive outcome.
Oh, for sure. In fact, it's the concept of the river that if there's no channel for it to go, it can just spread out all over the place, and then nothing really happens. It doesn't go anywhere. Those parameters, those guidelines, the channel, if you will, can get you exactly where you're going, and go with the flow for sure. And
then within that, within those parameters, then flow. And if there's a rock, you flow around it or over it or whatever it might be. Totally. We use one metaphor that I use a lot in my work and in my mind, just kind of organizing certain thoughts and shifting through sets, is I call it the anchor and tether model, meaning like what anchors me, like what is my absolute belief in this area, right? What anchors me here, and then decide how much wiggle room I have. That makes sense. Meaning not like, let me try to think of a good example for that. But I think there's all sorts of moral decisions that go into that. Well, lying could be one. Do not lie is a fair anchor to have, but there's some tether on that, right? And the classic example would be, my, sometimes there's tact, if nothing else, in the truth. The truth has to sometimes be tactful, which if that's not like completely accurate, is that a lie or not? So there's a little wiggle room. There's a little tether there.
But there sometimes might be omissions, if you will. You'll tell the whole. It's not like you're in court where you have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It's more like, we'll tell the truth, but parts that you can handle for now. Sure,
and it's a complicated thing. It's complicated, but with truth as the anchor, and something some sort of moral tether, the length of that varying as you go. I don't know. It's an interesting metaphor.
No, for sure. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't the idea of anchor and tether really rooted in neuroscience?
It could be, sure. What do you mean by that? Tell me more.
Okay, so I've actually heard, I have a good friend of mine who's very much into neuroscience. Every once in a while we talk about things, and with respect to, building new thoughts or building new habits, if you will, using an anchor to
Oh, that's, yeah. You know what's interesting about that is I thought of that idea as soon as we were, when we were talking about stereotypes. First of all, I think stereotypes in general, especially when they're potentially hateful or dangerous or otherwise, are just on the most basic level, lazy thinking, and on their worst level, hateful and dangerous.
Right.
But humans are, the brain is born to categorize, or developed to, designed to categorize, right? We chunk out information. We couldn't possibly process everything in our surroundings nonstop, every time we encounter the surroundings. We have to assume that there's certain properties of the desk that I'm sitting at right now that are constants. And then someone might come into that door around noon when one of the employees shows up for work, and these are like, right, and they don't throw me, right? I don't need to process them newly every time. Right. So we do have this way of chunking, right? And it goes back to, and this is sort of a lame example, but it's the one everyone leans on and makes the most sense, right? If there is something that is striped and growling coming out of the bushes, you don't wait to figure out that it's a tiger, right? That's like you react, right? That's
exactly,
again, the hardwiring of the brain. So I think there's probably, maybe that is a great entry to the anchor and tether idea. Meaning, like, we try to anchor. I guess in that way, the sentiment would be, I hope we're willing to pick up and move our anchor if we find out we were wrong. If we can, we might have to reevaluate every now and then. And that's life. That's, being open to doing that hard looking and processing. I think is pretty key.
Yeah, and kind of like the concept of that channel, going with the flow and so forth. Sometimes if you're anchored too firmly in that channel, you can also get really, really rough as well if you're not allowing yourself to go with the flow.
Totally. Man, okay, so I went to my undergraduate, the first degree before these other ones that we mentioned, was a studio art degree with a minor in sports administration. So there's kind of the balance there again. But from one of the best places on earth, Knox College. Just a small liberal arts college in rural Illinois. I love the place. One of the Lincoln Douglas debates there's a strong Lincoln history. I say all of that to get to this Lincoln quote. That was a shameless plug for my alma mater. It was Lincoln said something along the lines of, be very, I'm going to paraphrase, be very careful, pick deliberately where you set your feet, then stand firm. Meaning, like, being deliberate about standing for a cause. I think that makes sense in the context of that discussion. And I think especially with him, you got to be willing, okay, if you pick the wrong cause, then move your freaking feet, and then go move over, be willing to reevaluate, right? Be willing to admit that you were wrong, go find the new place, find the right place, and then lock in.
Right. And that seems to be, the path that you've taken so far to get to this point where now your passion that you're devoting so much time to, the Good Athlete Project, so find the right spots, follow the path of joy, if you will, until you get to that next passion. So I am really curious to hear what the path you took, how you wound up starting this, and what brought you there.
Yeah, for sure. So when I first, I'll give a quick story and then I'll explain the development. But when I first decided to do this, to essentially bring this thing into the world, I think it was January of 2016. I had just finished finals and I was a little bit stressed out. I don't like to admit that, but I was a little bit stressed out, or just come back from being stressed out. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to set New Year's resolutions necessarily, but I'm going to come up with a list of all the things that matter to me that I'm involved in, and then kind of a metric of, and then what do those things bring to my life, whether it's financial satisfaction, the ability to be creative, et cetera, et cetera. And I had this massive thing because, like we've mentioned, I'm involved in a number of things. For example, poetry, something that I will never live without, but it doesn't check the money box for me. You know what I mean? Creativity and passion, and and then I put this thing, like this sort of like twinkle of an idea down, the Good Athlete Project, something, starting my own nonprofit organization that did the work that I thought needed to be done.
Right.
But it was the last thing I added, and it literally checked every box, like just boom, 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 all the way down, just like the river analogy, almost like flowing water, boom, 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 checked everything. And that's when I was like, I have to do this. It was very clear to me. And I think the reason that it did that, and it did that, with so few barriers, and at least in the beginning, was it felt like I'd been doing it my whole life. So to answer your question, where did it come from? I was an athlete. And I think the stages of this move like this. I was an athlete at one point trying to influence, be good for, and lead my teammates. And I was lucky enough to be elected captain of a number of teams along the way. I did play a little indoor football, like you mentioned, and then actually went overseas to play in Europe for a little while, played 2 seasons in Ireland and a year in Spain, and had a blast. Absolutely love those guys still. One of them's actually visiting me right now. He's literally in the room as we speak. So that was like sort of stage one, right? That was my authentic experience in the space of athletics. Seeing the good and the bad, seeing all of it in the entire range, where it goes wrong, where it goes right. Then I became a coach. And I was essentially trying to translate my experience to people. So translating my experience to people, both in terms of, movement, play, etc., but also approach, mindset. I was just getting into the mindset stuff. How do you approach a game in a certain way? Anyway, after coaching for a little while, we did something. One of the things I'm most proud of, you mentioned the position I hold right now. It's at a place called New High School, which is a fantastic institution. I'm super proud to work here. I didn't make it as great as it is, but I'm happy to be kind of on board. And one thing that we did do here was we took a program. Well, we made a program. We did not have a strength and conditioning program when I started working here. So when I started, I was lucky enough to be the first strength and conditioning coordinator. It was me in a room with about 80 people. And over the course of 6 years or so, we grew that program. We now serve 1,200 students, and we have a part-time staff of 8. And we have a large group of volunteers as well. So people are and those 1,200 students, it's all opt-in. There's no attendance being taken. Everyone just wants to be here. So I took part in the creation of that. Meaning, if we're going to articulate this, I was a player, then I was a coach, and then I was expanding my role as a coach. And at that same time, I had to start training coaches. So coaching coaches to meet the needs of our 1,200 students. So these are step by step by step. The next level of that was another project I'm involved in, the Illinois High School Powerlifting Association, which is a super unique version of powerlifting, in my opinion. It is all team-based. It is all co-ed, meaning the Illinois High School Powerlifting Association will not host a meet that is not co-ed. We're trying to change the culture of powerlifting, break down the stigma so more people feel welcome to it. The 4 staples of it are character, culture, equity, and service. Finance is never a reason for people not to participate. We will waive every single meet fee if necessary, but we want young people to be able to take part in what we see as a very clearly fantastic learning platform, right? And I'll touch on that just for a second. Sure, powerlifting specifically is like I love football. I came to powerlifting from training for football. But powerlifting is far more clear as a teaching platform, in my opinion, because the ball is not going to bounce strangely in powerlifting. The weather is not going to pick up at an inopportune moment. The approach is very clear. You show up every day. You work diligently. You use great technique. Once you're done, you take care of your nutrition. You sleep well. You take care of your recovery, and then you show up the next day and do it again. And then when it's time to compete, hopefully your coach has done a good job of periodizing a program so that you peak at the right time. And when you peak, when you compete, you just show off all the good work you've done, and all this stuff. You probably heard of, Angela Duckworth and grit, growth mindset, conscientiousness is one of the, all the things that in the SEL literature and the character development literature, everything that people suggest will lead to success down the line can be cultivated and taught pretty directly in that space. So, which goes to the point being, now our goal is went from player to coach to coaching coaches to scaling that model. So we're trying to we have 1,200 people in-house. We are trying to get that all across the state. And when we spread it all across the state, we're trying to make sure that it is done in the same or similar ways that we're doing it, right? With character at the forefront of this thing, with process at the forefront. And then the top tier of that sort of the governing body of all these things, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
would be the Good Athlete Project. And the Good Athlete Project is this, it's an international nonprofit, sports-based nonprofit, but really it's an ed consulting foundation focused on outreach,
Okay.
leadership training, and research. So outreach, like we will go into places and support people who want support and who want to do what we're doing, which is maximize athletics as an educational platform.
Gotcha.
We've been all around. Our first trip was went to visit a friend of mine down in Haiti. He runs a nonprofit called Basketball to Uplift the Youth of Haiti. We've since been to California, Boston. We're kind of inner city of Chicago, inner city of Boston, Baltimore, all over the U.S.
Right.
Moving soon to where are we going? We're down in Brazil, potentially in Singapore, going to Ireland in the not too distant future. We're really just kind of spreading, trying to again support anyone who's interested in having our support and having our help.
Right, exactly. So I'm kind of curious about the idea of using athletics, because it's obviously athletics has been used, particularly in the world of maleness, if you will,
Totally.
to build character and to talk about, not consistency, character, learning, good work habits, learning integrity, all those things. But how are you using the Good Athlete Project to break down some of those ideas that sometimes get entrenched and cause men to become, I guess, emotionally constipated, as I term it?
That's a totally fair way to do it. Honestly, emotional constipation would be not so terrible in some cases, given the fact that like the other end of that spectrum is the correct end of the spectrum is much different, but emotional constipation somewhere on the wrong end of it, the far distant side of the wrong end, be the kind of violent hypermasculinity that gives sports the stigma that it has, right?
Right.
It's, let me be very clear. I am still trying to be an athlete. I love athletics. I am so passionate about the work that we do here every day.
Yeah.
Our kids are amazing, and I'm so happy that we have the space to teach them in. But it doesn't always go this well, right? One of the things that absolutely fuels me is sports gone wrong. I think for a lot of reasons. Even right now, I'm like, it's like getting under my skin right now, just thinking about it, thinking of potential. I don't want to touch on the current political climate, but locker room talk,
right,
shouldn't look like that. And it doesn't in every situation.
Sure.
But unfortunately, sometimes it does, and that's what grabs headlines. That's where we need to be doing a lot of work.
Sure. On that locker room talk thing, how much of it would you say is a more of a generational thing, not just cultural, but generational?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I can comment on. But I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I've been in a lot of locker rooms, both as a player and as a coach now.
Right.
I don't know. I would be guessing if I said anything, so I'm not sure.
Okay, no. I was curious because the thought just occurred to me. Yeah, because when you talk about who we're talking about,
right.
and when you say, oh, it's just locker room talk, like you, it's like I've heard. I'm not as into athletics as you are, but nevertheless, I've been in my own share of locker rooms and on teams and so forth. And you hear stuff occasionally, but not to the extent that you hear. And I'm like, I wonder if it is how much of that is representative of that particular generation. And because certainly our generation. I'm a Gen Xer myself. I'm 48, and there were those generational issues, and it seems like all the ones that have been coming after me seem to have fewer and fewer of those hangups, although there still are things which come up that seem to be just across the board.
Totally. Yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely going to do some thinking about that, though. But I think what you've mentioned is, like, regardless of where it was generationally, I think what we've got is, in sports, is we've created something with momentum, meaning you get a group of people together, align their cause, and something is going to generate momentum. In some cases, it gets people to say things that they wouldn't normally say, and certainly wouldn't say to their sister or anyone, any other human being, probably.
Right.
It also, though, has the power to move people to generate momentum in a really positive direction too, and that's kind of one of the aims of the Good Athlete Project. We want to strip the stigma from the sport so that we can use it for the platform that it is,
Right.
And we also want to get in front of all that stigma-inducing behavior. You know, and like we want to make sure that that kind of stuff does not happen. And I think we have a kind of refreshing take on it, because the people that we have working for us, like we've all played, we are all the kind of people where like we don't have like a soft approach in any way, and you know, to athletics. We want to compete hard. We want to train hard. We want to do this right way, and we want to make it very clear that being tough does not mean talking tough, degrading women, talk, you know, whatever that locker room talk might be. Those are two very different things. You can knock somebody over on the field and then, you know, and then go put your arm around a teammate when he's having a bad day. Those things don't have to be separate.
Right. Yeah. They're not mutually incompatible.
No, they're not. And going back to the stereotype, that's just a thing that we've taught people. If people are doing it, it's a thing that we've taught people to do. To separate, like, that's what tough looks like. We made that up, you know? And I do feel, not only am I passionate about my research and I feel really lucky in a lot of ways to have the opportunities I do, but it's something that I feel like almost obliged to do, not realizing until a little later that this was a unique combination, football, painting. It made me realize even further that it was an artificial divide. I'm not saying everyone has to love football and everyone has to love painting, but I'm saying if someone makes the break and separates the two, it feels artificial. They're both just extensions of being human. Pick and choose what you'd like, but they, you know,
it's kind of like a subject that we've talked about, you know, on several different times on the show, which is the idea that there's no separation. There's no separation at all between any human being, between us and the universe or source or whatever it is that you want to, you know, look at how you want to look at it, or whatever labels that you want to use in order to make sense of things. There's absolutely no separation. And being able to break down those barriers or those ideas of the separation is what sounds like is definitely one of the stated intentions, or one of the maybe perhaps unspoken intentions, rather, of the Good Athlete Project.
Right. Yeah. I think it's probably more of an unspoken intention. I think, and the reason being, I have studied some East Asian religion, and I hear you, and I do a lot of mindfulness training myself, but we do with our athletes. I guess another big thing is I want to be very sure that that we use a process. We always do. We call it meeting people in their space, right? And not everyone is aligned with that idea.
Right.
I'm open to it. I think it's a great one. But I'm not sure everyone is aligned to. So we want to be sure that we don't explicitly align with any core set of beliefs. And that's a big part of what we do. So when I'm up here on the north side of Chicago, the tactics that we use and you know, to address and meet our student needs are different than what's going on even 20 miles south in a different part of Chicago, and especially 3 hours from there when you get into rural Illinois. And then you're talking about going to California, Boston, or Haiti, and it looks wildly different. So the point is, we got to be open enough to meet people in their space and address, you know, align as much as possible with their values and things like that. Direct those values when we feel like maybe they're not totally right, you know, like to roll over your opponent with a truck doesn't seem, you know, like a good set of it. So we try to direct something like that, but we do want to hear it, right? If that's authentic, if that's the kind of thing that people are saying in a certain space, we want to hear it. So
for sure. And that's, you know, I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I was kind of hoping that would surface at some point, which is, you know, the idea, you know, this meeting people in their space, but also some of the challenges. I was kind of curious, some of the challenges as you expand internationally, learning the cultural norms or the cultural language, or not just the language, but the cultural language as well, in order to be able to meet people where they are and help break down the barriers that exist there and the stereotypes that may exist in other countries as well. Yeah,
that's the it's kind of the work of a lifetime, really, if you think about it like that. And there's no quick answer, quick fix, but I use a term, and it may be lame, but it's just called accurate looking. Right. And you just have to be willing to slow down and look without preconception, and look at, you know, literally look at the human beings that you're dealing with, and look at and take into account their values and emotions and everything involved.
Exactly.
Just accurate looking, and then build from there.
Yeah. In other words, every thought, every value, every idea has value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wouldn't push to say that we even need to share the values, right? Like
Yeah.
it's possible. Yeah. That's I don't agree with everyone on everything, but I'm willing to listen to almost everyone on anything, right?
Indeed.
And where we go from there. That's the kind of thing that's malleable, that remains to be seen.
And that's the type of thing that helps to break down those barriers and create unity, if you will,
right?
Understanding, connection, and so forth.
Yeah, I love that idea of breaking down a barrier. Totally. I'm sorry, I'm getting lost in thought here. But that's the big thing, right? To be willing to break down the barrier to conversation, if nothing else, is such a huge thing, and that might be generational. And I'm going to talk about my parents, and if they ever listen to this, I hope they don't get mad at me. But like, the willingness to engage in conversation, whether you disagree or not. We talked about like there being some sort of universal connection. If you can enter a conversation realizing that both parties, or however many parties are involved, want the best possible outcome and are bringing their best to the table, then like we have to be willing to have that conversation. I think too often in really important discussions, whether it's race, religion, culture, whatever it might be, raising young human beings, students, teaching, all of it. People, once they hear something that makes them bristle, they either disagree vehemently or break it off, or and that might be even worse. Break it off. No, we're not going to have this conversation. If those are your opinions, then you stand over there. That is, and I hate to say it, I think we've polarized so many important conversations, and I think that's messed us up a little bit.
Indeed. I look at it as kind of almost, not to go too far off a field here, but definitely I think with the advent of the 24-hour news cycle and social media, talk about a perfect storm of creating polarizing conversations where people don't want to hear anything which doesn't reinforce their perceptions.
It's amazing. Yeah. That's being talked about a lot in my social circle. So I hope I'm not being like redundant or cliche here.
Not at all.
But is there anything so obvious if we're willing to confront it? Like your Facebook feed is a cultivated stream of similar opinions, it is not a great way to get to know the people around you. No, that's totally true.
Yeah, it's interesting because
not cultivated. I meant curated. You curated your own.
Totally curated. Exactly. In fact, there's a podcast that I enjoy listening to periodically, Hidden Brain. One of the NPR ones, and there was an episode not long ago shot on Facebook about the curated feeds and the stories that we seem to get caught up in that reinforce whatever is going on, and then it turns out that when you actually break the mold of whatever the conversation is, suddenly everybody privately starts coming to you saying, "Oh my God, thank you for being so courageous," because I've been feeling the same thing, and I'm afraid of actually speaking up about it and so forth. So I guess that leads me to another question which I have in my mind regarding the areas that you focus on through the Good Athlete Project. Obviously, helping people realize their potential, particularly through athletics. Yeah. But what other areas do you guys focus on as far as being able to break the conversation, or widen the conversation, if you will?
Sure. Yeah. We want to be experts in the athletics conversation and be able to talk about anything, but of those infinite number of things. Right. And when we do that, we want to bring in other experts. So like, for example, we want to be able to talk about relationship violence to teams. And I'll touch on that for a quick second.
Yeah.
Actually, a friend of mine that I went to grad school with, Justine, she started something called Relation Shift, and we've talked, and we're going to hopefully work more and more on creating a curriculum to talk about that in an athletic setting. So like, and here's why that kind of plays into the conversation that we're having right now. I kind of believe that, or I have faith in whatever way that people are generally not terrible people. And I don't think that someone who makes the decision to play a sport I don't think that makes them worse somehow. I do think there is the potential when you go back to that locker room talk idea. Let's just call it what it is. If there's a conversation of degrading females, hypothetically, and if there is an unhealthy relationship, at least in the conversation, right? And there might be no action behind that. But it could be just people talking like idiots, about degrading women and sexual conquest and things like that. If that's going on over and over and over again, that might be the tipping point. And you can imagine this situation. If there is a human being who at 3:00 some evening after a night of partying has the opportunity to either make a really bad decision or step away, right? It is possible that you've activated some sort of pre-moral, you've just made it regular enough, through this kind of talk over and over and over again, that they might make a bad decision. Now, I want to be very clear that I'm not letting anyone off the hook for anything. I hope that this won't be misinterpreted in any way. I'm just saying that I think it's possible that people making those bad decisions are influenced in part. Well, I don't think it's possible. They're definitely influenced in part by the culture that they are a part of. And if that culture is not a positive one, if it's leaning in this dangerous direction, then that's a conversation that should be had routinely, regularly by the coaches of those teams. It can't be sort of like a under the radar, don't do that. It should be, no, this is how you respect everyone, but including females, and like literally being able to have the talk about sexual violence and relationship violence and not shying away from that. And I don't know. It's just a conversation that needs to be had.
Sure, for sure, yeah, and especially coming from people who are respected, such as coaches.
Totally.
If it's repeated time and time again. So how would you encourage a young athlete who doesn't have a coach around, and who he is listening to that toxic locker room talk, if you will, to stand up and speak up and to challenge without necessarily breaking, without necessarily being shunned by the rest of the group, because that social cohesion within it, particularly in a team setting, in an athletic setting, is so critical and so important.
That's so good, because that's one of the big questions, really. There's this upstander movement, right? And I believe in it. And I also know the actual dynamics of a locker room. And if you are the one voice going against the grain and you are adamant about it, you might be one of the only people willing to do that, and that's noble, but have you taken your own feet from under you in the process? So there's sort of a tact in that, right? That needs to happen. And actually my old boss taught me this kind of metaphor. I think the key in some of those situations, and it's situation by situation, and there might be some instances where you stand up and you say, I hope I can say the C word. You say, cut the crap. You know what I mean? Like you stand up and you're like, put an end to it. Boom. Right. But that would mean that the culture is close enough to being a positive one, that sort of behavior stands out and you can stand up against it and it's no problem. I think when the culture is already tipped in the direction of unsafe and bad, for lack of a better term, I don't know. I think maybe one of the things you do is equip people with simple strategies, and that's just talk to your teammates in a non-public setting, right? Because you can have those conversations, and I don't want to say convince people, but just align beliefs that be like, hey, did you hear what so-and-so said? What a jerk. You can have those behind the scenes without taking the legs of the people who agree with you out from under you immediately. Right. And again, going back to what this guy said, his strategy, my old boss, in so many ways was, you can't just jump into the river and push it the other way. We got a lot of river metaphors today, by the way.
Yeah, we do.
But essentially, you start to turn the stream little by little by little by little until the negative stuff all of a sudden finds itself flowing in the wrong direction. So, sometimes it does take tact like that. And that's a really tough thing to do. But you're making me think about a lot of stuff right now and that's hard that strategy is probably difficult to ask like a 15-year-old kid to tackle. But I think it's as difficult, probably less difficult, than asking a 15-year-old kid to stand up in front of his peers and say, stop. So it's tricky.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah,
so tackling it, from obviously group dynamics are always going to be super, super powerful,
right.
and that's been shown time and again.
Yeah,
But being able to perhaps have a one-on-one conversation with
huge.
the teammates, or perhaps the ones who are at the core of generating that or instigating the conversation, keeping that
Right,
conversation alive, having that one-on-one, sitting down, hey, you know what? Let's have a conversation. I want to understand you a little bit better.
right. And I think, you know what, you're right. And I think, and that is something that we can certainly encourage our kids to do, but I
Mhm.
think it's something that good coaches will absolutely do, is
Yeah.
essentially identifying the fact that there is some sort of social momentum, social hierarchy
Mhm.
within even just a single team, isolated to one single team, and saying, if these three people who everyone seems to be looking toward are
Mhm.
on the right path, on the right page, the ripple effect of that just might matter. And
Mhm.
and that's another thing that I think is part of the power of the Good Athlete Project, and something that everyone can and probably should observe is, when the star quarterback walks down the hallway,
Yeah.
whether you like regardless of your stance on the whole thing, he is noticed, right? So to acknowledge that social clout that he has, for better, you can either say, well, it's inappropriate, he shouldn't have it. Well,
Mhm.
he does. So to tap into it deliberately as a coach and make sure that you're addressing the people who have a great effect, who can be essentially catalysts
Yeah.
in the locker room, that's powerful stuff. And
Yeah.
then again, to help us have that discussion,
Mhm.
that's when we recruit people like Relationship and under, the experts in
Yes.
the field, right?
Yes.
We want to be able to navigate the discussion. We want them to help us do it super effectively.
So, do you guys have like a formal screening process in place in order to find the right coaches who are like a fit for the organization, and who you don't have to necessarily do a lot of work with, if you will? You
Hmm.
train them more about the processes and
Yeah.
less about the concepts.
Yes. Yes, I would say.
Okay.
The people that we find, the short answer is yes. The
Uh-huh.
people that our advisory board, first of all, is fantastic. They are college professors, many of them my former professors from Harvard. So they've got some name recognition, but also a great deal of expertise. We're
Mhm.
lucky to have the director of surgery, the chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins. So we've surrounded ourselves with people who really know what the heck they're talking about.
Right.
At the top level. And then we have these incremental levels of involvement. And I think what you're asking about really is the people that I have on board with me doing the
Mhm.
workshops, being with kids. That is two things. I think in the hiring of those people on that level, we're looking for people who are passionate, capable, and trustworthy. And then once we find those people, then we really help them with the language, because how
Yeah.
something is framed is super, super important. So I think, but that's part of who we hire. So the
For
people we
sure.
bring in are also open to learning more about themselves, getting better at this every day, myself included.
Mhm.
People are like, I hope I'm nowhere near how good I will ultimately be in terms of helping young people, in terms of using the
Yeah.
language appropriately. I hope when people ask about that and where the Good Athlete Project is going, I hope I can't even see it from where I'm sitting, right? I
Yeah.
hope that the growth is so important and meaningful that it just keeps going,
Mhm.
and we'll keep right along with it.
Mhm.
I should also mention, if it's okay, if
Yeah.
another thing that we really like to talk about is mental health. And I know that aligns with some of the things that you guys have talked about.
For sure. Yes.
Yeah, so that's another one. So we talked about like sexual and relationship violence. That's something it's a discussion that needs to happen in athletics.
Yeah.
I think mental health is one that needs to happen in athletics for countless reasons. We unfortunately lost a close friend, former player, and former employee
Mhm.
this past summer.
Mhm.
And have aligned with essentially the nonprofit who does grief counseling and awareness on that level now. And one of the things that we're doing, in addition to supporting their cause through fundraisers and on the ground type stuff, we are also hoping to do the same thing, partner with them in having that discussion with players. The basic idea there is essentially, if you are part of a team,
Mhm.
you should never feel like there's no one to talk to, right? And if that is, to the idea that situation would exist, that here's 80 of us all aligned in our cause, and
Yeah.
we all ostensibly, or we all say at least we care about each other, but there's this barrier up between like how much we're allowed to care about each other, to, you know, what kind of conversations we can have. That's the thing that we're trying to get rid of.
Right.
You know, if someone is if someone feels part of their, you know, the family of the team, but doesn't feel comfortable enough going to the coach or to the players, and they're feeling at those very low points, when they're at those points, then we've mishandled the platform in some way.
Right,
So,
exactly. Or at the very least, fallen short of the ideals, but understanding and recognizing that there's always room to grow and to learn from those experiences, for sure.
Totally.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that just kind of resonated with me on a very deeply personal level. You know, being somebody who's so sociable, yet at the same time having been the loner in the crowd.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I can so see, particularly in an athletic and a team setting, where not being able to, feeling isolated in such a powerful group dynamic, especially when it's, you know, a positive group dynamic. Yeah, and being able to recognize the signs and having that support and so forth is, so great.
Totally. Yeah, right. And again, and all these essentially, the Good Athlete Project, if you got to the core of it, is probably mostly about professional development and coaching coaches, because I mean, those are the people that will be, we used the word catalyst already. Those are the catalysts for greatest amount of change. Those are the people who influence the people who will have some sort of ripple effect on the social, you know, the near social situation.
Right.
Those are the people that we can go in and do a workshop, right? And that's good. But that's good for a day. If we can equip coaches with, you know, not only, you know, the language, but just the desire to keep pushing on these fronts, then, I mean, that could change the entire, not just team, but program. It can change the athletic department. If you get 2 or 3 sports who are starting to adopt these new and refreshing, you know, ways of approaching athletics, pretty soon the tipping point is the entire athletic department. Now you've got, in some cases, 4,000 people. 4,000 people with social clout in a mini environment called a college campus, right? That are hopefully changing the way the whole thing looks. I think it has the potential to be very, very powerful.
Yeah, I can certainly understand and appreciate why you're so passionate about that. And I love, you know, for those who might be listening to the audio, you can't see Jim's face when he just lights up. You so light up when you're talking about that. The effect, that ripple effect,
right?
Being able to reach the right people who can then reach the right people.
Totally. Right. And I think, and another thing that's kind of fueled me recently, and maybe this is a segue to the concussion conversation, is some people calling for the dismantling of contact sports is one thing. And not only is it just probably not going to happen, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put our resources in the anti-sport bucket as far as I'm concerned, but put all our resources we got to enhance the sports bucket. It makes total sense, because I mean, we have a platform, like we said, you mentioned the coaches being powerful. I mean, obviously modeling is hugely powerful, but here's a situation. If you forget that it's sports, where we've got novelty, where we've got these group dynamics, social momentum, you have potentially enhanced neurological states through all the exercise and movement and things going on. The human brain is wildly receptive in that state, right? So what the coach chooses to input during that time is massive. Not to mention that platform that we just described, that receptive platform, is happening for 40 million people, you know, on a pretty much daily basis, right? So we're not even inventing the space, right? We're seeing it, trying to peel back, realizing it, trying to look accurately at what it really is, and then change the way that people interact within it, right? And if so, now we've got 40 million people. You know, nothing's ever going to be 100%, but massive amount of people moving in the right direction. Now to use that metaphor again, now we might have changed the flow of the river, and people going against it will stand out.
Absolutely.
That'd be the hope, at least.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. So let's talk a little bit. Let's change course a little bit here and talk about your interest in CTE, or for those who don't know what that term stands for, it's chronic traumatic. I might slaughter this, but encephalopathy. There we go. I got it.
Nailed it.
I always trip over that one.
Yeah, I think that is my interest in it. Yeah. I mean, I'm terrified of it, is the short thing. I also don't think it's the norm. I think it's far from being the norm.
Right.
So my view on that.
Actually, before you
yeah,
go into that, why
sure.
don't you explain a little bit more for the layperson what that actually is and what causes and what might cause it? If I understand, it's due to repetitive traumatic injuries to the brain. Is that right?
100%.
Okay.
I mean, and you pretty much just did it. I
Okay.
am not an expert in CTE.
Right.
I try to have some level of expertise in concussion. I would say on the concussion spectrum, there's obviously immediate acute brain damage, potentially death. That would be the far end, terrible version of, what a concussion, like a blow to the brain.
Right.
CTE would be maybe more of like an insidious damage that grows after experiencing what you just mentioned, the chronic trauma to the brain.
Yeah.
It is also in the greater context of the concussion discussion, I think pretty far to one end, or at least I hope. Okay, and that might be some people that will hear this will take issue with that, but I'd like to explain if that's possible.
Sure. Yeah.
I think one of if we talk about the concussion discussion again, I'm passionate about looking accurately, and the first thing I want to say is this erupts from this charge to dismantle football. That's where a lot of this comes from me. First of all, we have to acknowledge that it's not just football that causes concussion. So you ask yourself, do you want to prevent one's child or a student or someone that you're looking after? Do you want to prevent them from playing football, or do you want to prevent them from concussions? And obviously the answer is concussion. If so, we need to start to look at the mechanisms. Like how would one become concussed? Well, the number one reason people enter the emergency room for MTBI, mild traumatic brain injury, is falls. So, I mean, just don't fall, I guess. But like, point being, like, it's not just, these aren't just like football players. Now, I say football because we're in the U.S.
Right.
If we were in another country, it would be hockey. It would be soccer. And you could say, well, soccer is not as dangerous as football. First of all, I agree. I agree with that. But also, Eric Naumann is the name of a professor at Purdue who did a study, who's done a number of studies tracking the impact of soccer players, the impact of head injury in soccer players.
Right.
He essentially has tracked, I'm trying to think of exactly what it was, put the level of impact on the brain while heading a goal kick at the level, at the same level as a football tackle, at the same or above most football tackles. Obviously, it depends how one tackles and whether it leads with the head or not.
For sure, yeah.
But, I mean, you just don't think of it that way. Frequently, it's as high as number 2, but always in the top 5 on college campuses in terms of incident is girls soccer in terms of concussions per player. But people don't think about that. If we wanted to eliminate concussions, we would have to consider eliminating football, hockey, martial arts. People don't think about equestrian, right, horseback riding, but I mean, terrible issues come from that.
Sure.
Gymnastics, where maybe they're less frequent, but when they happen, they're gruesome.
Yes.
All this stuff. Point being, we have to think about the entire picture. The other thing, just to go back to football for a second, intensity and duration are major contributors to this concussion discussion. And one way I try to unbraid that discussion when it's football specific is I reference Alabama, who in this last season was this big and mean and talented. I mean, they had just a dominating defense. In NCAA football, that was kind of the standard, was Alabama.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at that, Alabama, that is essentially the biggest, strongest, fastest people from a high school crop moved on to that level, right? That impact, not only the duration, because they play more games and the intensity is clearly higher, is just different than other levels of football. And then if you go one step further to bring into the CTE discussion, the NFL, when draft day comes around, 75% of the Alabama roster will be left at home. So you've got the cream of the crop of the cream of the crop of the cream of the crop that moves on to the top level. And then they play, who knows, 5, 10, 15 more years. Right. Intensity and duration are not even the same ballpark anymore. For example, I mentioned last year an article came out about dismantling Harvard football.
Mm-hmm.
Harvard played 10 football games that year. The Patriots played nearly double, right? So not only are you, are the people bigger, stronger, faster, colliding at different intensities, but they're doing it more often, more regularly. Like you mentioned as the definition of CTE, they're doing it more regularly. So literally it's conceivable that 2 years of professional football at the NFL level would be like repeating a 4-year college career, if only in terms of number of games played, right?
Right.
If you play 40 over the course of your career at Harvard, you might play 38 to 40 in 2 years with the Patriots if you go on to win, hypothetically. So again, I'm not even making an argument here. I'm just trying to unbraid the discussion so that once we do, we can look at it in its appropriate ways.
Right.
It's like saying, I would think it's pretty obvious that someone with a 10-year NFL career will be at higher risk of these things, these diseases, which when they go wrong, go tragically wrong. But they'd be at a higher risk after a 10-year NFL career than after a high school career or playing at most colleges or whatever the case might be.
Right.
So that is like one of the entries to that. And the metaphor we use is like, to say football is bad is kind of lazy thinking again.
Yeah.
And I'm obviously a football advocate, but that'd be like saying, is driving a Volkswagen around the neighborhood the same in terms of risk as driving an Indy car for 200 laps, right? They're both driving, but intensity and duration has changed massively, right? So the risks are higher in one situation. And I think until we're willing to dive in, until we're willing to look into it and dive into it and segment it and look at each specifically, I just don't think we can jump to conclusions. And I have rationale for that too. I think one of them is if we were to jump to conclusions, well, let me also say this while I'm on the topic. There is really convincing and interesting work going on at Boston University in terms of the examination of deceased athletes, and like I said, when it goes wrong, it's terrifying. I think about it in my own case as a former player. I think about all my uncles and my dad and everyone who's played, and I also think about the students that I work with. I would never want to introduce them to harm unnecessarily, especially that kind of stuff. A sprained ankle is one thing. We're talking about something different. But I will say that even though the numbers in terms of confirmed cases of CTE on post-NFL players, even though the numbers and percentages are really high, in the high 90s%, that's still saying in a certain percentage of the population of people who's at the greatest risk because of intensity and duration and thought they were symptomatic, therefore donated their brains, even among that highly selected population, it's not 100%. So it's not a guarantee. Another way to say, we're not determining an outcome just by participating in the sport. Now, there's all sorts of discussions that can be, is it worth the risk? Is it, all these discussions can be had thereafter, but it's only once we acknowledge that and stop saying football does this, that we can entertain the discussion. I think you have to do that legwork first.
Right. Absolutely. And it's not like, and rather than taking that absolutist view, which, can affect so many levels of society, but oftentimes and especially in athletics, when you have that type of absolutist thinking, if you will, kind of just can go out of control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will just say, just for sake of interesting anecdote, not science, there is a hockey player whose name I'd like to respectfully bring up. His name is Todd Ewen. And it's kind of, if we don't believe that if you don't think the platform is worth looking at accurately and potentially saving for sake of character development and all those things that I believe in, here's the other end of that spectrum. And Todd Ewen played, I don't remember what it was, played a number of seasons in the NHL and battled with depression, I would imagine, his entire life, but I don't know, certainly at the end of it, because ultimately he took his own life. He was 49 years old, ended up taking his own life, something that has become sort of, unfortunately synonymous with some of these old pros. He's 49 years old. He wasn't that old, but he was convinced, at least in terms of the reports, what the reports are saying, that he had CTE, meaning he thought he was battling depression. He was going through these things. He felt alone. And because he was so convinced, because of the popularization of, the movie Concussion and all this stuff, because of the popularization of CTE and these things, it feels like he didn't think that there was a way out.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't something that he could work through. He's like, I've got this essentially terminal thing. My life is never going to be the same. There's no way out. And sadly, he took his own life. CTE can only be diagnosed posthumously. So upon autopsy, after the autopsy, they found that Todd did not have CTE. His brain did not have CTE. Right. So even though he did play in the NHL and was this high impact player, it wasn't it was depression that killed him and took his life. And my fear is like, in that situation, again, having dealt with this a little closer to home recently, I'm like, the idea that we have popularized this idea that he was screwed, for lack of a better term, because he played this contact sport, that certainly did not help the situation. I don't know. There's danger there too.
Sure.
So point being, if I do have an argument in this whole case, is I'm not saying play football. I'm not saying play hockey. And I'm certainly not saying that if you do those things, they will absolutely lead to anything.
Right.
But I'm saying we need to unbraid it and look at it accurately. We need to evaluate the risks. Right. Every one of these things is complex. Probably on the research side of things, we need teams of people evaluating not only prevention, limitation, recovery, all these things. What role does nutrition play in experiencing concussion?
Yeah.
Every bit of it. And I could go on about this all day. I have a lot of opinions. Not as many answers as I'd like, I think.
Sure.
But I think but I'm comfortable with that.
Sure.
Because I think we should tread carefully and push for answers, not pretend that we have them.
Right. Well, it's interesting. The whole thing about opinions, the way I look at it is opinions help to generate questions. And it's the questions that leads to answers.
Totally.
And so, it's like, you know what? Every single opinion, whether or not I agree with it, has validity. And I love being challenged. I love having some of my own thoughts, called out on the carpet. And so I can take a hard look at them.
Right.
So I love the fact that you have these opinions and passions and so forth, because it opens up the whole discussion and broadens the whole just this what we're doing here with on the podcast as well, and that is helping to facilitate the discussion about and
you're so right. And I'm sorry if I got
it's great.
Close there for a minute.
I'm so glad you did.
And like I said, I would never tell someone that you have to play football. I think that's equally silly as telling someone that you shouldn't or can't, Yes, I don't know. I'm very open. I will say this though, if there were ever some sort of conclusive evidence that said participation in athletics, and like I mentioned, it's not just the contact sports are the ones that we associate directly with this sort of issue. If there were ever some direct relationship, I would be at the front lines. My conversation would change, right? And I would say, okay, we've looked at it accurately. We found this is an issue. We need to stop. So that's straightforward. I'm totally open to that idea.
Yeah.
I think if it gets there, we'll have to reevaluate and find other places to sort of cultivate the next generation in terms of character and things like that. And there's plenty of opportunities for that, for sure. We can find them. We can be creative. But yeah, I'd be at the front of that line. Yeah, I just don't think, but I think that line is forming prematurely, I guess is my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, let's jump on this bandwagon, let's formulate this idea, and let's just go gung ho. And no, your opinions are wrong. And that's it's that whole cycle of people talking at each other versus people talking with each other. The art of talking with each other seems to have been lost, and yet it happens every single day. If it's in a public forum, maybe not so much. Right. But let's keep the discussions open. Keep, talk with, not at.
Totally.
What an idea, right?
I know. You're right. And it's funny. It's like, it's so obvious, but people so obviously don't do it, right? I think you're exactly right. That reminds me of one of the things that we throw around in the Good Athlete Project a lot is like, do we want to be right or do we want to be successful? And part of meaning, like, I think a lot of people do talk at each other. They want to enter a discussion and be right. Like, look what I know. Like, and force an opinion on someone.
Indeed.
Success is different than that.
Absolutely.
Success absolutely comes in the form of, I hate to hang on this term, but accurate looking, willingness to compromise. But we keep talking about conversation. That's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. Man, talk about a good conversation. I didn't even realize we've hit our hour mark already. And I was like,
have you really?
Yeah. And like, we could go on. We could go on for a long time. So since the Good Athlete Project is a 501(c)(3) in tax terms, it is a nonprofit organization.
Right. How
can people donate? How can they get in touch with you? How can people volunteer?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That was nice of you to bring up. Even we essentially we just finished iteration 1 of the project, and we essentially wanted to see if we were going to be able to get it up off the ground and do it well. And the decision was made, for better or for worse, that I think for better, that we were not going to fundraise a dime. We weren't going to try to raise a dime until we knew it worked, until we were very confident in our product. Long story short, I'm many thousands of dollars in the hole at the moment, but we've just started fundraising. We actually, and no joke, timing, it just is incidental, but tomorrow night we have our first ambassador board meeting, which is like our on the ground sort of, young professional troops organizing the fundraisers and things like that. Yeah. I think the easiest way to find us, to learn more information about our future fundraisers and things of that nature, would be either on Twitter or Instagram at Coach for Kindness. So it's Coach, the number 4, Kindness. Those are where we're most active. We also have a website, goodathleteproject.com, that will be, after tomorrow's meeting, that will soon be revamped. So that'll be kind of cool to look at in the coming months probably. But social media at Coach for Kindness. And I would definitely encourage people to reach out, because as we've said many times, I'm always hungry for the conversation and willing to share ideas. So
for sure. And if they want to volunteer, same thing, get hold of you through at Coach for Kindness.
Either one of those. I think you could, the email is goodathleteproject@gmail.com.
Okay.
So reaching out in that way. We're in certain cities around the US. We have certain college chapters. I don't know how public those chapters are ready to be quite yet, but we could certainly talk about whether there's one near you, or if someone can contribute from afar, or what those roles might look like.
Nice.
And we'd be very grateful. So.
Well, Jim, I so appreciate you being here tonight. I have really enjoyed our conversation, getting to know you better. I look forward to talking to you again.
For sure. Yeah, I hope we can do it again.
For sure.
I have plenty to say.
Awesome. That's so great.
All right, well, thanks again for having me.
For sure. And everybody who's been listening, thanks again for joining us. And don't forget, realmenfeel.org. You can catch us on iTunes. And let's see here. Oh, gosh, my mind just went blank. Facebook and iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play. So we're all over the place. So feel free to reach out to us. And again, everybody, have a great night.
Thank you for listening to Real Men Feel. Until next time, visit realmenfeel.org, join the Real Men Feel group on Facebook, and share what you thought of this show. Please give this podcast a review on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you are discovering Real Men Feel. Reach out to us at realmenfeel@gmail.com. Learn more about Andy Grant at theandygrant.com and Appio Hunter at appiohunter.com.